He stood in the hallway frozen, listening to the sound he had prayed for and feared at the same time. His 3-year-old daughter was crying, not the quiet, empty silence that had haunted the house for weeks, but real, breaking sobs, raw, uncontrollable, alive, the kind that ripped through his chest and left him gasping for air. Just hours earlier, she hadn't eaten in nearly 2 weeks. Doctors had failed. Specialists had shaken their heads. And now on the floor of her bedroom, she was holding a half-eaten sandwich and crying in the arms of a woman he barely knew. A black woman everyone else had overlooked. In that moment, the billionaire realized something terrifying. His daughter hadn't been fading because she was sick. She had been trying to disappear, and the person who finally heard her pain was the one the world was quickest to judge. Stay with this story, because what he discovers next will shatter everything he believes about grief, power, and race. The morning Lydia Freeman first stepped into the Halston townhouse, the air already told her she didn't belong there. The house sat just off Rittenhouse Square, all brick and iron railings, the kind of place people pointed at during walking tours. Lydia paused at the gate, smoothing her coat, feeling the familiar tightening in her chest. She'd learned to read rooms long before she ever entered them. This one smelled like money, grief, and rules that were never written down. Inside, the silence was heavier than the marble floors. Mrs. Pauline Whitaker, the house manager, led her through a spotless kitchen without smiling. Lydia noticed the way her eyes lingered, not hostile, just measuring. As if Lydia were another object being brought in, something that could break if mishandled. "She's upstairs," Mrs. Whitaker said. "Miss Amelia. She hasn't eaten in almost 2 weeks." Lydia nodded. She didn't ask why no one else had been able to help. She didn't ask what the doctor said. She already knew the answers. Grief didn't listen to credentials. What Lydia didn't expect was the man standing at the window. Richard Halston turned when he heard footsteps. Tall, pale, dressed like someone who hadn't slept but still owned the world. His eyes flicked to Lydia, then away, the way people did when they decided something about you in under a second. "You're the new hire," he said. Not a greeting, a statement. "Yes, sir, Lydia Freeman." He nodded once, then looked back outside. "How long do you think you'll last?" The words weren't cruel. They were empty, as if he'd asked the same question of too many people already. Lydia met his reflection in the glass. "As long as your daughter needs me." That made him turn. Just for a moment, something cracked through his exhaustion. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief. Then it was gone. He walked out without another word. Mrs. Whitaker exhaled slowly. "Don't take it personally. He's tried everything." Lydia glanced at the untouched breakfast tray on the counter. Cold eggs, dry toast, juice that had settled like it gave up waiting. "Everything," she repeated quietly. Upstairs, Amelia Halston sat on the floor of her bedroom, knees tucked to her chest, staring at the wall. The room was full of toys no one touched anymore. Dolls arranged perfectly. Books stacked like they were waiting for a child who'd disappeared. Lydia didn't go in. Not yet. She sat outside the door, back against the wall, and waited. That alone was enough to make Mrs. Whitaker nervous. "You don't have to do that," she whispered. "The specialist said—" "I know what they said," Lydia replied. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. "They also said she was physically fine." Minutes passed, then more. Inside the room, Amelia shifted, just slightly. Lydia felt it like a pulse. Later that afternoon, Richard Halston found Lydia in the kitchen, washing a pan that didn't need washing. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You lost someone," he said. It wasn't a question. "My mother," Lydia replied. "I was 7. He swallowed. "Did you stop eating too?" "Yes." That made him sit down. For the first time since Lydia arrived, the distance between them changed. Not disappeared, just shifted. "I don't know how to help her," he said, staring at his hands. "Everyone keeps telling me to fix it, to do something." "Maybe she doesn't need fixing," Lydia said gently. "Maybe she just needs someone who isn't afraid to sit with her pain." He looked at her like that idea scared him more than anything else. That night, Lydia went home to her small apartment in West Oak Lane. The bus ride felt longer than usual. A man stared at her too long. A woman clutched her purse tighter when Lydia sat down. It was subtle. It always was. Back in her kitchen, Lydia made herself a grilled cheese. Butter, white bread, American cheese. The smell filled the room, pulling her back decades. Her grandmother, Clara Freeman, used to make these on Sundays after church. When Lydia couldn't eat, Clara didn't argue. She sat down and ate with her. That memory stayed with Lydia all night. The next morning, she arrived before sunrise. Mrs. Whitaker frowned when she saw what Lydia pulled from the fridge. "That's not on the nutrition plan." "I know. The doctors." "I know." Richard Halston appeared in the doorway, hair still damp from a run. His eyes locked on the pan. "What are you doing?" "Making breakfast." "That isn't appropriate." Lydia turned off the stove and faced him fully. "With respect, sir, what you've been doing isn't working either." The room went still. People didn't talk to Richard Halston like that, especially not people who looked like Lydia Freeman. He stared at her. "If this doesn't work, you're done here." "And if it does?" she asked. He didn't answer. Lydia carried the plate upstairs with both hands. She knocked softly, then pushed the door open. Amelia was in the same spot as yesterday. Lydia sat in the chair, placed the plate between them, and took a bite herself. She chewed slowly, calmly, like time wasn't chasing her. Amelia watched. "My mom used to make these," Lydia said quietly. "On Sundays, before everything broke." The little girl's fingers twitched. "If I eat," Amelia whispered, "will I forget her?" Lydia felt her chest tighten, but she leaned forward just enough. "No, baby. Eating doesn't erase love. It carries it." The child stared at the sandwich. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she took the smallest bite. Outside the door, Richard Halston froze. He covered his mouth as his daughter cried. Not silently, not disappearing, but loud, broken sobs that sounded like life rushing back into her lungs. And in that moment, the billionaire understood something no doctor had explained. His daughter hadn't been refusing food. She had been trying to follow her mother. Before you hear what Amelia says next, and before you see what this moment forces Richard to confront about himself, let me ask you something. Do you believe grief looks different when you grow up being ignored or judged for the color of your skin? Yes or no? Stay with this story. The next part will change everything. Amelia's sobs didn't stop when the sandwich slipped from her hand. They came harder, louder, like something that had been locked inside her tiny chest finally found a crack to escape. Lydia didn't rush to hush her. She didn't tell her to breathe. She didn't say it would be okay. She did the one thing grief asked for and adults often refuse to give. She stayed. Lydia wrapped one arm around Amelia's shaking shoulders, pulling her close just enough so the child could choose whether to lean in or pull away. Amelia collapsed against her almost immediately, clutching Lydia's sweater like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "I miss her," Amelia cried. "I miss my mommy so much." Down the hall, Richard Halston stood frozen. This wasn't the quiet suffering he'd learned to tolerate. This was raw, messy, undeniable pain. The kind he'd avoided because he didn't know what to do with it. The kind no amount of money could silence. He stepped into the room. "Amelia," he whispered. She looked up, eyes red, face blotchy, still holding Lydia with one hand. "Daddy," she said like she wasn't sure he would answer. Richard dropped to his knees in front of her. "I'm here," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm right here." She held out the half-eaten sandwich toward him like it was proof of something. "I'm eating," she said softly, "like Mommy wanted." That was when Richard cried. Not the quiet tears he shed alone in his office at night. These were ugly, shaking sobs that made his chest hurt. He pressed his forehead to his daughter's small hand, kissing it again and again, as if that could undo weeks of absence. Mrs. Whitaker watched from the doorway, her hands over her mouth. She had worked in that house for 20 years. She had seen arguments, divorces, business disasters. She had never seen healing look like this. Later that afternoon, Amelia fell asleep for the first time without medication. Lydia sat in the chair beside the bed, holding the child's hand, while Richard stood by the window, staring at the city. The silence felt different now, not empty, fragile. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" he asked quietly. Lydia didn't pretend not to understand. "Tell you what?" "That she was trying to disappear," he said. "That she thought not eating would take her to her mother." Richard turned toward her. I hired the best doctors in the country. They talked about trauma, regression, nutrition. No one said this one. They couldn't, Lydia replied, because they didn't sit with her long enough. And because sometimes people don't hear children when children don't sound convenient. His jaw tightened. He knew what she meant. He'd done the same thing. He had listened for solutions, not for truth. That night, Richard stayed in Amelia's room. He sat in the chair until his back ached, watching her chest rise and fall, terrified that if he closed his eyes, she might stop breathing. At 3 a.m, Lydia appeared quietly with a cup of coffee. She didn't say anything, just placed it on the nightstand and turned to leave. "Wait," Richard whispered. She stopped. "How did you know?" he asked. "What she needed, what I missed." Lydia thought of her grandmother, of church basements, of people who learned to survive without being seen. "I didn't know," she said honestly. "I remembered." The next few days changed the house. Amelia ate small meals, not because anyone forced her, but because someone sat with her. She talked again, slowly at first, asked questions, laughed once, then seemed surprised by the sound of her own joy. And Richard changed too. He canceled meetings, ignored calls. When his board complained, he didn't answer. For the first time in his life, the company came second. That didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, Richard's sister-in-law, Margaret, stopped by unannounced. She took in the scene with narrowed eyes. Lydia on the floor coloring with Amelia, shoes off, laughing softly. Margaret's smile was tight. "I didn't realize you'd hired this kind of help." The room went quiet. Lydia felt it instantly, that familiar chill, the way words could slice without raising their voice. "She's not help," Richard said sharply. "She's family." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Already?" Lydia stood slowly. "Excuse me," she said calmly, gathering the crayons. She knew when to remove herself. She'd learned that early. Later, Richard found her in the kitchen, hands shaking as she washed dishes. "I'm sorry," he said. "You shouldn't have to deal with that." Lydia didn't look at him. "I always deal with that." Her voice wasn't angry, it was tired. "People think they're polite because they don't say slurs," she continued, "but they still decide who belongs, who's temporary, who's allowed to stay." Richard swallowed. He had never thought of himself as part of that problem. Now he couldn't stop seeing it. That night, Amelia asked a question that shattered him. "Daddy," she said quietly, "why did you stop reading to me?" The words cut deeper than any accusation. Richard sat on the edge of her bed. "I was scared," he admitted. "I thought if I stayed busy, I wouldn't fall apart." She nodded, processing. "I thought you didn't want me anymore." He pulled her into his arms, shaking. "Never," he whispered. "Never again." Across the hall, Lydia listened, tears running down her face. This was why she stayed. This was why she risked being misunderstood, underpaid, dismissed. Because sometimes love had to come from someone society refused to see. By the end of the week, the townhouse felt alive again, but tension still hung in the air. Richard knew the world would test this fragile healing. The board, the family, the unspoken rules of who was allowed to cross which lines. And Lydia knew something too. She was no longer invisible in that house, which meant sooner or later, someone would try to remind her of her place. The first real test came quietly, the way the most dangerous moments often do. It arrived in the form of an email. Richard Halston was standing in the kitchen early one morning, watching Lydia help Amelia spread butter on bread, when his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, expecting another board complaint or investor demand. Instead, the subject line made his stomach drop. Concerns regarding household staffing and child welfare. He opened it slowly. Someone had filed a formal complaint. Anonymous, of course. It questioned Lydia's qualifications, her boundaries, and most painfully, whether it was appropriate for a woman like her to have such intimate access to a grieving child in a high-profile household. Richard felt heat rush to his face. He didn't need to guess who it came from. Margaret's words echoed in his head. This kind of help. He looked up. Lydia was laughing softly as Amelia smeared butter on her nose by accident. The sound filled the kitchen like sunlight, and suddenly everything became very clear. That afternoon, Richard called a family meeting. Margaret arrived first, perfectly dressed, lips pressed tight. Two board representatives joined by video call. Mrs. Whitaker stood silently near the door. Lydia stayed upstairs with Amelia, unaware of what was happening. Richard listened as they spoke. They said words like liability, optics, reputation. They never said race. They didn't have to. She's crossed professional lines, one board member said carefully. We can't ignore the risk. Margaret nodded. You're grieving, Richard. You're vulnerable. You don't see how this looks. Richard leaned forward. No, he said quietly. I see exactly how it looks. The room went still. For weeks, he continued, I watched my daughter disappear while experts stood around her and told me to wait. This woman sat on the floor with my child and saved her life. Margaret scoffed. Saved? Don't be dramatic. Richard stood. My daughter tried to starve herself to follow her mother, he said, his voice steady but dangerous. And the only person who heard her was the one you all looked down on. Silence. If anyone is a liability in this house, he went on, it's anyone who believes love has a color, a paycheck, or a place. The board member cleared his throat. Richard, this could become public. Richard nodded. Good, I'll wait for you. That night, Richard sat with Amelia as she colored at the kitchen table. Daddy, she asked suddenly, is Miss Lydia going away? The question hit him like a punch. He knelt beside her. Why would you think that? I heard Aunt Margaret say she doesn't belong here, Amelia said softly. Richard took a breath, choosing his words carefully. Some people think belonging is something you're given, but it's not. It's something you build. Amelia thought about that. Then she nodded. She belongs with us. Yes, Richard said, his voice thick. She does. The next morning, Richard did something no one expected. He told the truth. He allowed a journalist he trusted to tell the story, not the billionaire angle, not the miracle narrative, but the human one. A grieving child, a father who failed, a black woman whose empathy succeeded where privilege could not. The reaction was immediate. Support poured in, so did hate. Comment sections filled with words Lydia had heard her whole life. Too emotional, overstepping, should know her place. Lydia read none of it. She was too busy helping Amelia learn to ride a bike in the park. When Richard apologized for the noise, Lydia smiled sadly. I've lived with noise my whole life, she said. I just didn't expect it to be this loud when I finally felt at home. That was the moment Richard understood the final lesson. Healing didn't end when the child started eating again. It continued when the world tried to pull them back into old hierarchies. Weeks passed. Amelia grew stronger. Her laughter returned fully now, bright and fearless. Sunday grilled cheese became a ritual. So did bedtime stories, always read by Richard, always with Lydia sitting nearby. One evening, Amelia handed Lydia a folded piece of paper. I made this, she said proudly. It was a drawing. 4 figures holding hands. Richard, Amelia, Lydia, and her mother drawn in the sky, watching over them. This is my family, Amelia said simply. Lydia felt tears slide down her face. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Richard watched them from the doorway, knowing something in his life had been permanently rewired. Months later, Richard stood in front of his company's annual meeting. Instead of talking about profits, he spoke about responsibility, about listening, about how the people society ignores are often the ones carrying the most wisdom. Some investors left, others stayed. Richard didn't care. At home, Lydia found a letter on the kitchen table one morning. Not a contract, not an offer, a handwritten note. You came into our lives when we were broken. You didn't fix us. You stayed. You belong here, always, on your terms. Thank you for choosing us. Family isn't blood, it's presence. Lydia folded the letter carefully, pressing it to her chest. That night, as Amelia slept between them on the couch, Richard looked at Lydia and said quietly, I don't know what the future looks like, but I know I don't want to face it without you. Lydia smiled, tears in her eyes. Neither do I. The townhouse near Rittenhouse Square no longer felt like a monument to loss. It felt like a home, not because of wealth, not because of status, but because love had crossed lines society tried to keep in place and refused to step back. Before we end this story, I want to ask you something. How did this story make you feel? Did it change the way you think about grief, race, or who we choose to listen to? If this story touched you, please comment 101 below to let me know. Tell me where you're watching from, what country, what city, and if you believe stories like this matter, please share this video so more people can hear it. Because sometimes the most powerful way to fight prejudice is to tell the truth and let it be seen.